What's up, everybody? This is Christoforou from the Duran, and I'm here with Aleksandar Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, and today we're going to take a look at Putin's visit to Serbia. All right, Aleksandar, Putin was in Serbia for a one-day visit. Serbia is the last holdout in the Balkans against joining NATO, so it's very much the last state standing. Of course, you have the Fyrom, North Macedonia, but I think it's pretty well known that the minute they resolve the name issue in Fyrom and it becomes North Macedonia, that it'll get greenlit to enter NATO fairly quickly. So you will, in essence, you just have Serbia now that is not a part of NATO, and of course you have historically very close ties between Russia and Serbia. Get into Putin's visit to Serbia, Aleksandar, the significance of it, what this means for both countries, and what this means for Europe and the West, the U.S. as well.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is you are absolutely right to highlight the very strong ties between Russia and Serbia. I mean, the two countries were allies during the two world wars. Russia went to war in 1914 in order to protect Serbia from aggression, from attack by Austria and Germany. And that was what started the First World War. And Russia played a very major role in liberating, in the liberation of Serbia from the Ottoman Empire. And the Serbs, for their part, have always felt a very strong kinship with Russia. Russia being, of course, a Slav country, Serbs being Slavs, and of course both Serbs and Russians are Orthodox Christians. So there is this very strong historic connection between Serbia and Russia. There is a very strong economic connection because the Russians are now looking to develop their pipeline network from Turkey into the Balkans involving Serbia, and Putin, sure enough, discussed all of that whilst he was in Serbia. And of course, the Serbs themselves have been looking to Russia for diplomatic and political support in this conflict they've had with NATO and with the Western powers over Kosovo, this breakaway province of Serbia, which NATO recognized as an independent country, but which most Serbs don't accept is. So there's lots of connections between Serbia and Russia. Putin came to Serbia perceived by the Serb people as a friend of Serbia. He received a massive welcome when he was in Serbia. I mean, there were large crowds on the streets. And of course, he is doing so, as you correctly said, visiting one of the strongest powers, because Serbia is a strong country in the Balkans, which at the same time holds itself aloof from NATO, which in 1999 waged what I have no hesitation in describing as a war of aggression against Serbia, with a bombing campaign against Serbia. So he has carried out a trip to Serbia, which carries out multiple purposes. It strengthens the link between Russia and Serbia. It emphasizes it. It develops economic and political ties. And of course, it strengthens the anti-NATO position in Serbia. A lot of Serbs having still very angry about that war in 1999 and withstanding NATO membership in exactly the way that you said.
Yeah, I look at that war that NATO waged against Serbia. To me, I always characterize that war as the beginning of the end of the Western Empire, the U.S. and Europe. Yeah. I look at that moment as a key moment when it all started to fall apart for the United States, for NATO, for Europe.
I think that's absolutely right. And can I explain why? First of all, it was NATO engaging in an offensive war after pretending to be a defensive alliance. As a major crossing of the boundary Secondly, it was a war waged without the authorization of the UN Security Council, which to my mind makes it a clear-cut war of aggression. Thirdly, it was a war waged to force violently a change of the borders in Europe. You hear lots and lots of people say that Russia changed the borders in Europe when it supposedly annexed Crimea, and that this is the first time this has happened since the Second World War. That episode in 1999 shows the falsehood of that. That was a violent change of the borders in Europe carried out by NATO long before anything which happened in the Crimea. And as a Cypriot, you know also, Alex, that borders were changed violently in Cyprus in 1974 by a NATO country, and that, of course, isn't talked about. So we have all of these issues. And of course, coming back to the NATO attack on Serbia, we've talked about the enormously strong connections between Russia and Serbia. It cannot be overstated that the effect of that attack on Serbia, on Yugoslavia in 1999 had dramatic implications in Russia. It brought home to many people in Russia that NATO was not a friend, that NATO was an offensive, not a defensive alliance, and that NATO was prepared to use force against countries which were friends of Russia. And it was one of the catalysts to the change of policy in Russia and the change of power in Russia, leading to Russia no longer being, in effect, an ally of the United States, as it had been in the 1990s, but becoming a sovereign country with an independent policy from the United States, which is increasingly coming to be seen in the United States as an adversary. So when you say that this changed the entire international system, and in effect was the moment when things began to go wrong for the Western alliance, you are absolutely right.
That's an excellent point. And I want to ask you something that's always been in my mind about what NATO did to Serbia. And it relates to Russia, and it relates to Putin actually directly as well. And you can give me your thoughts historically if this is an accurate assessment. Serbia was so stubborn and fought so hard not to be destroyed by NATO, and fought for so many years. I mean, it really did not succumb to NATO's aggression. I mean, they held out and they dragged it on, and they were stubborn. And that's a good thing, because if NATO would have destroyed Yugoslavia and Serbia quickly, I think NATO would have turned its eyes right away, turned its direction right away to Russia. It would have sought to dissect Russia into pieces, like balkanize Russia, like they did to Yugoslavia, at a time when you had a drunk and an incoherent Yeltsin at the helm. But Serbia bought enough time, I think, so that Russia could find Vladimir Putin, and Putin could bring Russia back to the prominence that it has today. Is that a correct assessment?
I think that's entirely right. I mean, what we tend to forget today is what a totally unstoppable force the United States and NATO looked like in the 1990s. I mean, and that was, of course, the unipolar moment. That was the time when people spoke of the United States as being the hyperpower. It seemed to many people then that the United States, that the Americans only had to snap their fingers and anything they wanted instantly and immediately happened. Not only did Serbia resist that, and resist that throughout the 1990s and beyond, but if you go and analyze carefully the military conflict in 1999, what is very remarkable and what was undoubtedly seen and studied very carefully in Russia was that bombing campaign by NATO actually was a failure. It didn't achieve very much militarily. The Serbs, who had a well-organized military, were able to withstand it. without suffering very much military damage. Most of the bombs missed. Stealth aircraft that the United States operated was shot down, and the Serbian military was that campaign. And I think a lot of people in Moscow came away and said to themselves, well, if little Serbia is able to put on such a strong military performance against the mighty United States and the mighty NATO alliance, then maybe we, Russia, a far bigger and much more powerful country than Serbia is, don't have so much to fear after all. So I think that had a very big psychological effect, which cannot be underestimated.
All right, bring us up to date now, Alexander, with Serbia, with Kosovo, with NATO, and with Putin's visit. What does this all mean? Can you try to wrap it up in the next 5 minutes? What's the significance of everything in the context of the history that we've also briefly touched upon?
Yes. Yes, I mean, we've talked about the past, now we've got to look at the future. First of all, it needs to be said that there are many criticisms in Serbia of the Serbian government. The Serbian government itself has been trying to negotiate a deal with Kosovo, the authorities in Kosovo, to try to come to some kind of a settlement of the conflict there, which is proving very unpopular with many people in Serbia itself. So there is an uncertain situation, but Putin himself has a good personal connection with President Vucic of Serbia, and I think he will partly have wanted to show that support to Vucic by coming to Serbia in the way that he did. But beyond that, there is the bigger agenda of whether or not Serbia will be drawn into NATO. And I think the Russians do not want, obviously, Serbia in NATO. I think that would be a psychological blow for them, going well beyond any military or geopolitical issues, because Serbia is such a close country to them. So I think Putin will have gone to Serbia in order to try to persuade the Serbs not to move in that direction and to remind them that there is a Russian option. And I think many Serbs are open to that. And of course, the Western powers, following all of this, are extremely concerned about it. And I have been reading in the American and British media lots of comments about Putin coming to Serbia and seeing this as some kind of a threat to the attempts to expand NATO throughout the Balkans. So we will be seeing a lot of issues there, and we will be also seeing, I think, the Russians once more trying to promote these pipeline projects in the Balkans, because they know that where pipelines go, where Russian pipelines go, that creates economic linkages, which, of course, make it less likely that countries like Serbia will gravitate towards NATO, because they will have an interest then in keeping good relations with Russia. So I think we are seeing a complicated game being played. Putin is a master player at that complicated game. I think a lot of Serbs are very receptive to the things he is saying, and we will be seeing movements over the next few years, with the United States no doubt making a strong counterplay of its own.
Do you think Serbia will ever get into the EU by resolving the Kosovo issue? Do you think that's ever going to happen?
Personally, I think that is unlikely. I know there are some people who talk about this, and there are pro-NATO and pro-EU elements in Serbia. I don't think they will ever prove strong enough, actually, to overcome the very strong feelings about this within Serbia itself. I mean, I may be wrong about that, but that's what I think. And I think that far too many people in Serbia, which is a very proud country, a very ancient country, will understand and sense that this is not the way for Serbia to go, that they have allies in Russia, potential allies in China, that they have options which did not exist in 1999, when they nonetheless withstood NATO then. And I think that will be sufficient to persuade them to withstand NATO now. My own personal view is that we've seen the peak of Western influence in the Balkans and that this will start to decline from now on.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the Serbs are seeing Europe around them disintegrate as well, whether you're talking about the Yellow Vests, whether you're talking about Brexit, Greece, Italy. I mean, that's got to play a factor in the Serbs saying, maybe this whole EU, NATO thing that they're trying to sell us is really not what it's billed out to be.
I think that's exactly right. I think the peak point of Western influence has passed, actually, and I think people in Serbia are now looking beyond the objectives of integrating Serbia into the Western system, because I think they realise that this isn't really friendly to Serbia anyway, and it's not the unstoppable force that it looked like even a few years ago.
Yeah, how things have changed. Aleksandar Mercouris, editor-in-chief. Yeah, go ahead.
No, things do change. Exactly, things do change. And of course, they're changing ever faster now. I mean, the world is not the same as it was. And I think we will see more change come.
Yeah, I think a pipeline, if Russia gets that pipeline to pass through Serbia, I think that's a big game changer right there.
It's a huge game changer, and as I said before, I mean, Western policy in the Balkans is creating instability in all sorts of places. It's creating political conflicts in Greece, where the government has just survived narrowly a vote of confidence. It's creating conflicts in Macedonia, where people are very unhappy by the name change that's been forced on them and by the attempt to dragoon Macedonia into NATO. It's having problems in Bulgaria, where there is also a strong swing back towards sympathies with Russia, despite Bulgaria being a member of NATO. And of course, we see in Serbia itself this massive reception that's been given to Putin. So, as I said, I think we're seeing the whole of the Balkans start to shift, and Putin's visit to Serbia is both a catalyst of that and a sign of it.
Yeah, well put. Aleksandar Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on that notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. Visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, help support the Duran. In the description box down below, you will find links to our PayPal and Patreon pages. Please donate to the Duran, it helps us out a lot. And you can go to iTunes and Soundcloud and follow us there so you can get an audio copy of the show. And of course, don't forget, go to theduran.com and you can see all the articles that Alexander looks up to every day. Aleksandar Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Until next time, take care.